All right, we'll get started, and as others join us, they will just have missed this exciting beginning of this session. So welcome, everybody. Appreciate you joining Orr Group Talks. This is really an opportunity for us to sort of get into and share the ideas and the leaders that we're interacting with. We appreciate your joining us. I see some familiar names there in the chat. This will definitely be a participatory experience. So if you have questions, we'll give you some directions in a second on how to do that. But first, I just kind of want to set the stage here. We're going to be talking a lot about technology today. We're going to be talking a lot about things that have happened very recently, as recently as the last week, that I think are really moving the field and the sector. But whatever you may think, technology has changed your life. It sort of drives your life all the time. It has changed, your professional life, whether you've realized it or not. And that will continue to be the case. Nonprofits tend to have a history of kind of burying our heads in the sand a little bit when it comes to technology. And we'll get into a little bit, but I think that the time for that is over. We're going to be joined today by my friend Adam Martel, the CEO and founder of Givzey. He's a nonprofit leader and recovering fundraiser. He never buried his head in the sand, though, after being a major gift officer at Babson College. And actually, I just was reminded, was the son of fundraisers as well. So we'll hear a little bit about that. But he started a firm you all might remember, Gravity. And used sort of AI, which was not the popular buzzword at the time, but was using AI to augment major gift officers. That was before sort of AI became cool. And I remember he came into our office and pitched this to us, and I was like, I don't even understand most of these terms, but it really was an interesting and exciting time. And after scaling and selling that business, he founded a couple of years ago Givzey, with an initial mission to leverage technology to retain donors. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the other things that they've been doing of late as well. Just to give you some directions, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box. If you have questions, please put them in there for us. We'll work them in and sort of ask them as we go. Look, someone's using their AI assistant to take notes. That's great. You also have the chat there at the bottom. Please feel free to say hello in the chat. Tell us where you're from, your organization. Let others get a feel for who's with us. I think those are the directions. You're in your house, so I don't need to direct you where the bathrooms are. You should already know that. But we'll jump in. Again, technology is moving fast. Nonprofits, tend to be hesitant to invest generally, but specifically in technology, no less adapt it. But again, I think, we have an obligation to use every tool available to us to advance our missions. So it's really just not true to ourselves or true to the people we're trying to help and the change we're trying to make in the world to just sort of take tools and say we're not going to use them or leverage them. So there's a lot happening. And the last week, Adam and his team at Givzey have taken a real leap forward. For those of you that have seen or followed that, version 2 is what they're calling it. It's the first autonomous fundraiser. It became public late last week. I had gotten a preview of it earlier that week. They've already started to work with some donors, which is amazing. But why don't we just sort of jump into it? Adam, welcome. Thanks for being here. Thanks for everything that you do. Tell us a little bit more about what this autonomous fundraiser is in version 2 and what you think it's solving for.
Yeah, Craig, thank you so much for having me. I've always been so grateful for our partnership, and I've always been so grateful for the Orr Group for your support. So if you go back to Gravity, the first AI company that we started, it was 2016. And when we started that company, the thesis was that I was working at Babson as a major gifts fundraiser, and I had this database of 40,000 alumni, and I was a major gifts officer, so I had 200 donors in my portfolio, but there were 2,000 rated but unassigned donors out there, and we couldn't hire 10 more fundraisers to manage those donors. So my co-founder and I wanted to use data to predict not just which donors might make the biggest gift, but what we should be doing with those donors. And we went through this really great journey of trying to figure out how we can use artificial intelligence, which was really early at the time, to enable frontline fundraisers to manage more donors. And we learned so much in that process about artificial intelligence augmenting the frontline fundraiser's ability to manage a portfolio. And the technology was really primitive, right? We were using, if you remember at the time, Hillary Clinton had email database breach. And we used all of Hillary Clinton's emails to model the first set of self-writing emails that we produced. And that was eventually the product, were self-writing emails that were based on what we knew about the donor in the database. And these emails were wild because they sort of sounded like Hillary Clinton, but they were going out to donors. And it was just this wild time of trying to figure out what was next. And, we always thought of ourselves, and I always thought of myself as sort of being the person who will invent the bleeding edge of technology. So there are technologists, there are people at the bleeding edge of technology. I want to be the person specifically inventing the bleeding edge of technology. I want to be the person who looks as far ahead as we can possibly see when most people don't agree with either should you do it or can you do it. I want to be the person to do it as long as I think it's right. So you sort of fast forward to where we are now. We started Givzey, went through a couple iterations of the company. In the last iteration, which has been really great for us and still a really great, wonderful product, is a intelligent gift documentation management platform. So taking the belief that gift agreements, multi-year commitments should be scaled with both artificial intelligence and also really smart gift agreements has been great. Things like automating pledge reminders solves a real problem. And when I sold Gravity 2.5 years ago and I left, I was under a non-compete, so I couldn't compete. I couldn't really work in the AI space. That expired in May, and so last Thursday we introduced the AI design lab that we were thinking about, which is called version 2. And the sole focus of version 2 is to create the very first autonomous frontline fundraiser that has the ability to cultivate, solicit, and steward gifts from donors autonomously. And the results have been extraordinary over the past week. We have great partners, and we're really treating it like a design lab and like an R&D lab. We're going through tests. The tests are very structured. We're partnering with our partners closely to make sure that we're not going outside of the bounds of both what's ethical and what we think should be done. But the results are conclusively that autonomous fundraising is possible and that it will define the future for our organizations.
It's exciting. So I know we actually have a little bit of a video that'll give people a sense of it, because it's sort of, I think conceptually, you say autonomous fundraiser, people have a lot of different ideas of what that is. So let's test our own technology here and see if we can share this video to give people a little bit more of a sense of what you're talking about.
Hi there, I'm Alex, College of Charleston's first fully autonomous frontline fundraiser powered entirely by artificial intelligence. Our fiscal year ends on June 30th, and with your permission, I'll help you make your gift this year. Please confirm that you're okay working with me by entering your information below. Thanks again for your support, and I look forward to working with you.
All right, so we get there, right? That's sort of the beginning, and I do think that's an important sort of feature. Like, people are opting in. I know that's the thing you're sort of trying to test now, is how many donors will actually sort of agree to engage in this way. But I mean, what have you learned so far? It's literally been days, but I know it's already been exciting. What have you learned so far?
Yeah, it's been wild. So when you think about what we're doing, artificial intelligence up to this point has been to augment a frontline fundraiser's ability to manage more donors. It's AI for efficiency's sake. Can you enable a person to do more? It's sort of the bicycle for the mind. The revolution that we're in now, and that we're really at the very beginning at, and that we're really trying to start in fundraising, is the autonomous AI revolution. And it's not to replace frontline fundraisers. It's, I get that question all the time: is this going to take my job? And the reality is that over 50% of nonprofits cite staff shortages. I mean, every nonprofit out there, or a lot of them, or most of them, would hire more fundraisers if they were available. They're just not. So that's why you have these really big rated but unassigned pools. But what you just saw there is a culmination of a whole bunch of technology that's sort of in the world now, innovation on that technology, and then brand new inventions. We have 27 patents right now that we've filed for the brand new technology. And really what we're trying to do is combine things like synthetic human mimicking, which is the ability to not deep fake a person, but to make the autonomous fundraiser have more of a personality. We don't want the frontline fundraisers to build a relationship with the autonomous fundraiser. We want the frontline fundraisers to use the autonomous fundraiser as a liaison and a concierge to help them build stronger relationships with the nonprofits that they care about. And so opt-in permission is sort of where we are right now, particularly in these early days. So the frontline fundraiser asks for permission. They explicitly say that they are autonomously driven, that they are artificial intelligence. There's no human intervention, and it's totally transparent. So without that opt-in, the autonomous fundraiser doesn't work with donors. But with the opt-in, the autonomous fundraiser starts working with donors to bring them through a process and guide them through a journey to help them make gifts to the organization. And when you think about what fundraisers really are, when I think about what I did at Babson and what I did at Emmanuel College and what my mother did as a frontline fundraiser, we weren't trying to get donors to build relationships with us as much as we were trying to bring donors' attention to the wonderful things happening at the organization. And the more we go down this research, we sort of realize that, we've spent so much time trying to train donors or fundraisers on the winks and the nods and in all the ways that we can get donors to make gifts, the language we use, the process, the moves management steps. We sort of forget the fact that the frontline fundraisers, the real skill is to be able to almost be a shadow. You want to build some type of relationship with the fundraiser, but really that's working on behalf of the organization. And we don't see a better example of that than the turnover we see at every organization with fundraisers, where they leave and a new fundraiser picks up, and it's sort of like there's a transition period, but the work must go on because the organization has to be supported. So autonomous fundraising, it's just the future. And we're just learning so much about all those different areas.
Yeah, I think again that's such a key point, right? Like it's ultimately, and as a former gift officer myself, right? Like I think over time we start to lose sight of what the job is, and it is not about your relationship with the donor. It is about the donor's relationship with the institution or the organization that they're funding. I mean, and when you showed this to me, I guess it was about just over a week ago. I mean, I'm a skeptic. Like I come at these things a little bit skeptical, but like a light bulb went off. I was like, yeah, why does that necessarily need to be a human, right? Because my main thing is to connect people to the organization. And so talk a little bit about that. I mean, we went through it like there were like points, like the action points you're trying to lead the donor to. Give a few examples of those because I thought those were sort of interesting when we walked through.
Yeah. So right now, we'll talk about the test, and then I can talk about some of the plans we have in the future. But the test we're running right now this week, and it actually worked out really well. We're running it with Matthew Lambert at William Mary and Dan Frezza at College of Charleston. They gave us portfolios of 50 donors each. These are live-on side-ons who haven't made end-of-the-year gifts, but have given in the past. And they allowed the autonomous fundraiser to reach out to these donors, introduce themselves, receive opt-in permission, and then cultivate a relationship. And what we're trying to prove with these tests is that both donors will opt into working with artificial intelligence, and that the artificial intelligence can autonomously guide donors through a journey, and it really more of a pull instead of a push. They're not selling the annual fund. They're not selling the end of the year gifts. They're just bringing to it the attention of the donor that we are reaching the end of our fiscal year. So language that's similar to I wanted to receive your permission to work with you. Because we're hitting the end of our fiscal year and we'd be so grateful for your support again. You've given for the last 7 years, and if you'd be willing to give for an 8th year, we'd be so grateful. And you think about the relationships that the fundraisers build with donors at the higher levels. Birthday wishes, when things happen, when big events happen, a lot of these donors get emails from frontline fundraisers, and that happens at the very top of the giving pyramid. But the rest of the pyramid is really just marketing, segmentation, data. That's where sort of the humanality can really come in. In the future, the next set of tests we'll be running are around live-ons, side-ons, re-engage donors, engaging donors in volunteer activities, engaging donors in event invitations, and then phone-a-thon. For some reason, phone-a-thon seems to be the biggest question that we get, and we have it solved. We've been early tests, but essentially, when you think about a phone-a-thon caller, think about a student in higher ed. You have a student who's a brilliant student who's having a great experience at the organization, and you pay them $12 an hour. They come in for 3 hours and they call 50 donors. 40 don't answer, 5 yell at them, and then 5 have conversations. What we're doing is using the autonomous fundraiser to go out to all the donors, let them know about the student ambassador program, and then we offer a calendar invite and a calendar link where the donor can schedule a meeting with a student. So what's happening is that the students come in now and they have 15 meetings scheduled with donors that are half-hour increments. And when you can start, embracing that way of looking at phone-a-thon, it's no longer a student cold calling. It's a student coming in and answering these questions from donors about their life, their experience, why they're there, what inspires them, how have things been, what's campus like now. It changes the way things work. And I think that's a great example of autonomous fundraising, not replacing donors, but really reinventing an entire way that we thought about fundraising, an entire category.
Yeah, I have not worked with or been in any sort of university or college where they haven't been saying like phone-a-thon, like it's not working for us the way it used to. What can we do different? And like honestly, this is the first good answer I've heard, so I love it. Okay, let's sort of go step back here a little bit. I know there's gonna be lots of questions about this. We're going to talk about it some more. And folks, just a reminder, if you have questions, there's a Q&A box at the bottom. You can put them in there. We'll work them into the conversations. But why don't we just step back? Like, how did you get here? Like, I think your story is fascinating. You were a fundraiser. You're doing the same types of thing I was doing and pounding your head against the wall on the same issues. And you actually figured out how to solve some of them while I just kept complaining about them. But so Adam, tell us a little about your story. How did you get into this? How did you get here?
Yeah, so I grew up poor, and my mother, she worked at Merrimack College, which is where I went to college, but she worked there for 10 years. She got the job. I remember the day she got the job. She said, "Hey, I'm going to work at Merrimack College because this is how we're going to pay for your tuition and your sister's tuition, because you get tuition remission. You don't have to pay. All you have to pay for is books and housing." And so she worked there as a gift processor, as an advancement services professional, and then as a fundraiser. And I used to go to her office every day after middle school and high school and I would open up all the checks because it was in the mid-90s, and so there was no online giving. Everything was given by checks or wire transfers. So she would have these stack of checks, and she was entering them into like a really primitive database. But I would be there opening up the checks, and I still have the paper cuts on my thumb from opening up the checks. But from there, I started 2 companies. I was a men's and women's volleyball coach for a long time, and I loved coaching. And as part of my coaching journey to different colleges, I got a job fundraising. And I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with the relationship building. I fell in love with the ability to use, my ability to inspire donors to make gifts and connect them to things that they care about. That intuition, that EQ, I just loved. And I did that for Emmanuel College, which is a small Catholic college in Boston. Moved to Babson, and then we were entering a campaign, and we just found over and over and over that the rate of an unassigned pool was so large. I remember the board. I remember there was a meeting with the board, and the board said, "So you're telling me we have $2.3 billion in capacity in California?" And it was obviously based on, Craig can give $100 million gift, and they just added up all the zeros. And it was crazy. But the reality is we hadn't asked them anything. We didn't know if they were $5 donors or $100 million donors. We just hadn't got to them because we didn't have the capacity to expand past the portfolio. So, as we built that, I sort of midway through, I realized that we could do something better if we could find a way to ethically and morally introduce the world to autonomous fundraising, not to augment a frontline fundraiser, but to sit alongside a frontline fundraiser. And the real outcome of that is my belief that our frontline fundraisers should be managing 5 autonomous fundraisers. Every individual, every human should have the ability to have their scale expanded by managing autonomous fundraisers. So one of the results of the early test that we're doing is if a donor does opt out, they usually 9 times out of 10 say, "I don't want to work with an autonomous fundraiser. I want to work with a traditional fundraiser." And being able to make an introduction automatically, the autonomous fundraiser says, "Great, I'll make an introduction to Craig. He's a frontline fundraiser at the organization. He would love to work with you and help you make your gift this year." And then there's a quick email that's automatically sent introducing, "Hey, Craig, Sally would like to make a gift, and I wanted to introduce you." It's just wild what we can do, but not replacing people, not replacing humans, not replacing jobs, but augmenting the actual work you can do and expanding it with autonomy.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right, let's sort of think more broadly about technology and sort of the nonprofit sector, right? Like how do you, where else do you see, the sector can benefit from sort of leveraging technology, and sort of how have you seen the sector evolve on how it thinks about technology over your career?
Yeah, so we released this last Thursday, and since last Thursday, my phone hasn't stopped ringing. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, down to small local papers saying, my hospital is on the verge of going out of business. Can you help? All of that, I think the interest that we're receiving isn't so much around the technology, but it's actually around the quantum leap and the shift in thinking where over the past 20 years, Salesforce, Blackbaud, all these big organizations, they sold us databases. And once everybody had a database, all these other organizations sold us data to make the databases bigger. And then over the last 10 years or 7 years, organizations came out and they said, "Listen, now you have too much data. There's an inverse relationship and correlation between how much data you have and how active frontline fundraisers can be." The whole model of if you give a frontline fundraiser 5 columns of data, first name, last name, email, phone number, and last year's giving, they're more likely to really interact with those donors as opposed to if you give them 50 columns of donors where they spend all their time trying to cull through to figure out which one's the best. So now you have these organizations that have expanded databases, and you have organizations that are helping you sort through the databases and segment and use AI to bubble things up. Over the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen AI, compress contact reports, auto-write contact reports, natural language generation, the whole concept of learning the way frontline fundraisers talk, that's taken shape. And the quantum leap here is that all of that work leading up to last Thursday was done to improve a frontline fundraiser's life so they could be more efficient, with the thesis that we are going to be bound by how many fundraisers we have, and we were never going to be able to break out of that. This is the first time we've been able to prove that if you have 10 frontline fundraisers, your organization can still do the work of 30 frontline fundraisers with autonomous fundraisers working under the 10 that you have. That quantum leap is sort of the biggest shift that I think we're seeing now. But everybody seems to be focused on how data and how AI can impact the mass amounts of data that we have. I think we have to quickly move from how do we use AI to sort through data to how do we use AI to build relationships with donors for our organizations. Once we make that shift, we won't be buying databases anymore. We'll be buying fundraising as a service. We'll be buying the ability for autonomous fundraisers to do what the organization needs most, whether that's an invitation to a ceremony or a fundraising dinner, whether that's an invitation to volunteer at the organization, or an invitation to make a gift at the end of the fiscal or calendar year, using autonomous fundraisers to focus on the areas that are most important. That's where I think fundraising as a service is going to just explode over the next 5 years. And it'll reinvent the higher ed in large hospitals and large nonprofits. But this is going to change the world for the smaller organizations that are doing really great work. There are so many small cancer research centers that aren't the big hospitals, but they're bound by how many donors they have. If you can apply this to a nonprofit that's doing world-changing work with one executive director and one fundraiser, but 20,000 donors, think about the impact that an autonomous fundraiser could have, making sure that the executive director and the head of development are focused on the top donors and then engaging the rest of them in a way that encourages them to make gifts. So no donor feels like they were left behind. That's where this will change the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, to your point earlier, right? There's not an organization I know that has enough fundraisers. There's not an organization I know if it has any kind of scale or database like a college, university, hospital, medical center, like that can actually reach all of their people, right? So it's like, why not sort of take these tools, put them out there, and sort of see if you can get new people, get to more people. I think it's fascinating. Just to sort of like, again, put on my skeptic, grew up watching too many Terminator movies, like, so my Sarah Connor or maybe Jurassic Park question, like, you can do it. Should we do it? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so first of all, the question of can we do it, that hasn't fully been solved yet. That's specifically what the design lab is. That is specifically what version 2 set out to do. Before last Thursday, everybody debated, should we do this? Should we apply robots to this space? Should we use artificial intelligence? What's going to happen to different things? Where are the moral and ethical components going to happen? But we had never proven that it can happen. And it's really easy to debate things that haven't happened yet, but it's really hard to be the first person to say, you know what, we're going to build it and we're going to do it ethically. We're going to do it morally. We're going to do it within the context of what we know to be true. And I think that you look at my background, my team's background, we were all frontline fundraisers. We know this space just as well, if not better than anybody. We lived this life. We had the prospect review meetings. We had good years and bad years. We had the end of the fiscal year and end of the calendar year pushes. We were there. So the question of, what's the worst thing that can happen? I don't think there are too many bad things that can happen with artificial intelligence and autonomous fundraising, working with donors. I think the worst thing that can happen is that, some of the autonomous fundraising might not be up to the donor standards in terms of comparing it to an interaction with Google or Facebook, because it's still a smaller company. So as we develop the autonomous fundraiser and we learn different ways to interact with donors, probably the biggest risk of donors saying, it's not good enough. I want to talk to a person because I'm not dealing with an autonomous fundraiser that has limitations, because we're inventing the bleeding edge of this technology every day. But truthfully, Craig, I think the best answer is, my stepdaughter almost passed away a couple of years ago when she was brought to Children's Hospital, and they saved her life, Boston Children's. And when I think about higher ed, when I think about camps, when I think about all of these nonprofits that are raising money, they're wonderful and they do a lot of great work. But when you apply and invent autonomous fundraising for a children's hospital, when you do it for an organization that will never have enough money because the work they're doing will never get easier and it will never get less important, that's why I think this is important. That's why I'm inventing this, and that's why my team's doing it. Every morning we think about, the team and I think about different ways that we can apply this, and it usually comes back to, there's a hospital in this area that, might go out of business. Can you use autonomous fundraising to help the organization stay in business? Can you use an autonomous fundraiser to help donors at children's hospitals make more gifts? When you think about it in that lens, it's not can you, and it's really not should you. It's why haven't you?
I like that. That's a good way to think about it. How much? I mean, so we had an interesting conversation around this. Like, so how much? We've all worked in places with terrible data. We've all worked in terrible databases. Like, how much data do you all need for this to work, right? Like, do I need to have, to your point, the 50 columns of information for the autonomous fundraiser to learn from, or how are you using data to sort of drive this?
Yeah, so I'll take a step back at Gravity. The thesis was we have a database with, about between 100 and 500 different data points about every single donor. And you think about the scale for 40,000, 50,000 donors, it's crazy how many data points we had. But the integrations of technology, connecting databases to the outcomes is really hard. And that was a really hard process. The onboarding was hard. It was a 3-month onboarding. With version 2 and with autonomous fundraising, the thesis is that as long as you have a first name, last name, email, and phone number, everything else, all other data points really should be generated by the donor, because it's the autonomous fundraisers, it's their job to ask questions, to guide the donors through a journey, to figure out what they care about, and to do that transparently and tell the donors what they're doing, what they're asking, why they're asking, and how it can help their giving journey. A great example is, as part of the opt-in permission, we're using this perceptive enabled technology. And, that's a big term. And when you think about self-driving cars, they have LiDAR, and perception enabled technology is the ability to see a car that stops in front of you and have the self-driving car stop. That's the perception enabled technology. It's the ability to perceive your surroundings. The very first version of that, and the most primitive version, is kind of a survey, right? And when you think about the autonomous fundraiser, one of the things we did early on last week, we put a question in there that said, please let us know what you care about. Why are you giving? And that direct question that's led to 100% response from donors has sort of proven that an autonomous fundraiser should be asking what a donor cares about and why they want to give to the organization. When you think about major gifts, if a donor called you today and said, hey, I have $5 million, I just sold the company, I want to make a gift to your organization, you would never say, great, the annual fund, it really needs your support, here's a link. You would get on a call, you go meet them and say, hold on, tell me about yourself. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your history. Why do you care about the organization? What do you want to impact? How do you want to make this change? All donors should be asked that question. And so when you think about the type of data that we need, the donor's name, first name, last name, email, phone number, that's the only data. And we've given ourselves that constriction so that all the data after that is generated specifically and directly from the donor. Once you have that, you have a pure data set that comes directly from the donor. You can start customizing the journeys. And the outcome here is hyper-personalization with every single donor. That's what we're proving now.
That's fantastic. So there's a couple questions here. Let me get the first one because it's connected to what you're just talking about. So the donor will populate the data set. Are you talking about answering verbal questions or typing answers? Because the second option will get old fast. But yeah, so how do I interact with this as a donor? I'm typing, I'm talking, what am I doing?
Yep. So right now it's V1, and what we've done is had the ability to create endpoint modules and nodes. So what's happening is it's a text message back and forth, but there's not much interaction because what we're doing is trying to guide you through a gift processing and a gift journey, a gift solicitation journey. So you receive an opt-in permission request. If you opt in, then the autonomous fundraiser usually sends you something around what you said that you cared about. Once that happens, there's a quick solicitation. But what will happen over the next couple of months is that in a month and a half, the autonomous fundraiser will reach out again and say, hey, Craig, I'm going to be in New York and the president's going to be there. I wanted to find out if you might be willing to meet with her. And you can talk about the area that you said you were interested in. So it's not so much about the back and forth. It's not a chat bot. And I think that's really important. It's actually an autonomous fundraiser. And if you think about it in terms of not technology, but a hire, if you were to hire a brand new frontline fundraiser that's brand new to the industry, that has never fundraised before, you'd give them a set of donors, you would give them the ability to access the database, and you would give them a whole bunch of one-on-one videos. And right now, what we're doing is trying to load one-on-one videos into the autonomous fundraiser to teach them some of the language that we know as fundraisers. So a lot to learn there, but really good stuff.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, we've got another question, just sort of broadly. How do you see sort of AI tools supporting the work of grant writers, right? So that's if you think of, major gift fundraisers, sort of the other sort of big body of people and work often in nonprofits is grant writers. How do you see that? How's AI going to impact that?
Yeah. So grant writing has been sort of a top request that we've gotten, sort of corporate foundation, and then a lot of grant writing. I think that the process to write grants, the generative AI is doing a fantastic job of helping grant writers accelerate their grants. Their grant writing. I was talking to a grant writer a couple of days ago, and she said that in a week she could do 3 to 4 grant applications. Now she can do 40 to 50. And where I think the autonomous fundraiser sits in is really to cultivate the relationships with the organizations who are giving the grants. So the ability to educate the organizations on the wonderful things that are happening, the stewardship opportunities, the obligation tracking, things like that. That's where I think it'll play a role early on. Long term, I don't know. The focus has been really around autonomously fundraising from individual donors. We haven't really thought too much about grant writing. But it's not that it hasn't been important. It's just that our singular focus has been autonomous fundraising from individual donors. But once we sort of solve that, and once we prove that it can be done and it should be done, and that it's viable financially and technology-wise, we'll move into other areas. Corporate foundations and grants are certainly high on the list.
Excellent. Another question here. So do you obviously the autonomous fundraiser interacting with donors is great. Do you also see it as an opportunity to upgrade current donors to new giving levels? How are you thinking about that?
Oh yeah. So last week, Call to Charleston did their first test, and the VP introduced the autonomous fundraiser to 2 donors. One of them made a $1,000 gift from a $50 last year gift. And so when you think about upgrading donors, there's a whole bunch of components there that we know as frontline fundraisers, but the ability to look into the database and pull out last year's giving. I said we only want 4 data points. I think the safest data point you can look at is sort of the last gift or the last couple gifts. And if you can make a solicitation, not from those gifts, but a generalized solicitation, and somebody says, hey, would you give, and somebody says, I want to give $500. The autonomous fundraiser could come back to that person and say, thank you so much for your support. It looks like you've given $500 for the past few years. Would you consider making a 5-year commitment of $500? That $2,500 gift would allow us to plan for the next 5 years. If so, I can send you over a Givzey gift agreement. And the ability to lock donors into multi-year agreements and solicit multi-year agreements is a great example of upgrading, I think, over the long term. And then upgrading gifts, we haven't found a really elegant way to do that. And I think it's really inelegant. And I think as a frontline fundraiser, if you were to say to me as a donor that you want to give $1,000 and you're so proud to do that, sometimes it feels offensive to say, that's great, would you consider giving $1,500? And I think that all the data, all the segmentations, all the companies that sell data, they say that if the capacity is higher for these donors, that you should ask for more. The challenge is when you get into the conversations and the humanistic elements of fundraising and the relationship elements of fundraising, you have to be respectful of what a donor wants. So in terms of upgrades, I don't know for sure, but we have seen upgrades, specifically because we're not soliciting larger gifts. We're bringing the donors through a journey that touches their interest and really addresses what they care about. And I think that when you can address a donor's interest with the organization's priorities, you'll see increased giving as a natural outcome.
Let's sort of shift just slightly here. So to talk a little bit more, obviously, Givzey was sort of doing some other work before May when you started to be able to focus on this. Tell us a little bit more about that, and what were you trying to solve for with that sort of with the initial product that's out?
Oh yeah, so the very, very initial product was Give Now, Pay Later, and we couldn't get through regulatory, but the idea was that we wanted to allow a donor to split a $1,000 gift into 4 parts. They would pay $250, we would cover the rest, and we had a whole bunch of regulatory hurdles. We quickly pivoted the whole company to gift agreements, so the first intelligent gift documentation management platform, and that has absolutely taken off and absolutely solves a really big need for a lot of organizations. The ability for frontline fundraisers to solicit a multi-year commitment gift in a meeting, pull out their phones, create the gift agreement on the fly, send it over, and get it signed by the donor while they're still there has revolutionized multi-year giving. And we're seeing that part of the company grow like crazy. It's just, it's been amazing. And we'll have an AI roadmap coming out for the gift documentation management platform, specifically around 3 different areas. One is compliance automation, making sure that all gift agreements are within compliance of the case guidelines, the FASB guidelines. The second is to improve the donor experience, by using artificial intelligence, by using what we're learning in version 2. And the third is to make sure that we're able to enable frontline fundraisers to expand and really focus on donors that might be willing to make multi-year commitments. So we have a whole bunch of algorithms that we have developed that have that the gift documentation management platform has the ability to sort of bubble up donors that might be willing to make a multi-year commitment, and then those asks will go out to the frontline fundraisers to make. So a lot of great progress there, a lot of great learning, but it's just it's a great product that solves a really specific use case for our industry.
Excellent. And actually, as somebody has mentioned in the Q&A here, a good point of In fact, today in the Chronicle, they suggested multi-year giving and getting donors to commit to multiple gifts over multiple years could be actually a solution to sort of the trends we're seeing in the Giving USA report that came out just earlier this week as well.
You got it. Yeah.
Right on it. All right, so we have another question here, which I thought was a good one, right? In terms of like this idea of a fundraiser managing 5 autonomous fundraisers, right? If that's sort of the future that you see maybe coming. What does managing those fundraisers look like, and like how does that relate to the rest of their workload?
Yeah. So right now you have DXOs at organizations that are managing 1,000 donor portfolios. They're doing the work, that they're doing all of the outreach to manage those portfolios, and the outreach takes up around 80% of their time. The actual conversations don't really take up all that much time. It's usually the outreach that they're doing, and then they spend the rest of their time really cultivating the donors that are responding. With 5 autonomous fundraisers that naturally lead donors to gifts, receiving a call from a frontline fundraiser back to the old days of actually fundraising for a real cause, saying things like, thank you for making your gift this year through the autonomous fundraiser of $500. I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to let you know we're trying to raise a bit more for this part of the organization. I'd love to tell you about it. And if you're willing to support us, we'd be grateful. Certainly no pressure. You've already been generous, but I just wanted to let you know about this area that we're trying to raise for. The ability for humans to do humanistic things. And humanistic things aren't always email outreach. They're not always text message outreach. They're not always calls. They're actually the things that happen in between when you get a donor to engage with you and you get a donor to commit to supporting the organization. That's where I think the majority of the frontline fundraisers really should spend their time. But when they're managing autonomous fundraisers, the autonomous fundraiser really should be directed at whatever their priority is. And when you think about a calendar year, at the end of the calendar year, December 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, those are tough days for frontline fundraising offices, where I remember getting the list of live bunts for that time and just knowing that we had to go through 500 of those donors every single day just to make sure that we had, some connection with them so they would make their gift before the end of the calendar year because we knew that was important to them. Same with end of the fiscal year, same with reunions, same with events, same with fundraising events. Being able to direct an autonomous fundraiser's focus to do something that the organization has deemed a priority, getting more people to the president's event, getting more people to the scholarship luncheon, getting more people to the R&D luncheon that the organization is hosting. The autonomous fundraiser doing things that are directed by the fundraiser, that's where I think that managing autonomous fundraisers will make a big difference.
Fantastic. What's kind of surprised you most through this journey so far? Like, as you've kind of gotten to this point, what's one or more things that you've been most surprised by?
So first of all, I think CEO and presidential buy-in from organizations has been overwhelmingly positive. We have not got a call from any VP, any president, or any CEO that said, you're crazy, you shouldn't do this, the world doesn't need this, my 5 frontline fundraisers are great, this is immoral, this is unethical. Everything that all the doomsdayers said about sort of AI in every industry, it has not happened. It just hasn't. I think there are some people who say, you shouldn't do this, but as long as you do it ethically, it's good and it's fine. So I've been really surprised pleasantly by how positive the response has been. I've been surprised by how many opt-ins we've gotten from donors that are willing to try it. Like I said, this is a design lab, so we're learning every day. And the goal of the design lab isn't to prove or disprove. The goal of the design lab is to continue to make progress towards building the autonomous fundraiser. You think about sort of SpaceX, they weren't trying to prove or disprove whether a rocket could take off or get to Mars. They were trying to get a rocket off the ground and get into space. And it was incremental improvements, and they had some explosions and some blowups, and there were some setbacks, but they're trying to prove that they can do it, and they're trying to make progress towards doing it. So the amount of people that aren't just okay with it, but that have come out of the woodworks and said, I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to believe. When I first heard it, I didn't really understand. I thought it was crazy. But now that I've heard the vision, now I heard all the opportunities, now that I've seen what an autonomous frontline fundraiser might look like, I think something totally different than I thought yesterday. And the amount of support we've gotten from people that they believe in us and they're rooting for us, that's been surprising and overwhelmingly positive.
Well, I would say the good thing is I don't envision at any point that the autonomous fundraiser can blow up like a rocket. So this feels slightly less dangerous. We have another question here. Is there a risk of AI impersonating other organizations and creating distrust?
Yeah, so that's such a great question. I think that's at the top of our concerns right now. How do you create authentication tokens to make sure that there's trust between a donor and an autonomous fundraiser? That is sort of top priority for us going forward. We get a lot of questions about deep fakes. We have a lot of people asking us, well, can't you just mimic with the president or the vice president or anybody at the organization? Can't you just put words into their mouth, sort of deep fake? That's not the point. We want this to be autonomous. We want to say, hey, listen, if you'd like to work with an autonomous fundraiser because it's good for the organization and you don't really want to work with a traditional fundraiser, this is a great option. And ultimately, there are probably 20-30% of an entire donor pool that would want to work with an autonomous fundraiser. But those 20-30% right now probably are only getting paper mail and email solicitations. There's a better way to do it.
Yeah, that's another thing that really occurred to me when we first looked at this is like, there are donors that don't like to talk to people, right? And so this is actually a much better experience than what we've been trying to force them to go have coffee with somebody. And the reality is like, they'll be much more comfortable interacting this way. For me, it depends on the day. I don't know. I think I usually like to talk to people, but some days not so much.
Isn't it so funny? My wife was a fundraiser as well. And she said a couple of days ago, she said, it's funny because all the people that we talk to for the autonomous fundraiser are fundraisers, right? So they're inherently kind of people. Like not all of them are, but the majority of people who get into fundraising are people. You like working with people. Of course you want to grab coffee. Of course you want to grab lunch. Of course you want an invitation to the organization to meet, the recipients of the work you're doing. But there's a whole population of donors who don't want to talk to you. They don't want to hear from you. They would be very happy working with an autonomous fundraiser and making their gift and moving on with their life. And the organization should be okay with that, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, I think we're kind of coming to the end here. If we have another question that popped up, let me just take this one and then we can probably. All right, how large was the sample size you used to find out how donors would like autonomous fundraisers? I joined late. My apologies if I missed that. You mentioned it in passing, but let's be more explicit.
Yeah, so they're ongoing tests, and the test started last week. This week, we're specifically working on portfolios of 2 sets of 50 donors that are live bunts before the end of the week or before the end of the fiscal year. And we're hoping we can convert them into donors before Sunday, before June 30th. Obviously, again, this is a very narrow test, but we're not trying to test that at scale this is going to work. We're trying to test that we have germination of positive results. And if you can get positive results, we can build on those positive results. But the approach we're taking is sort of measure twice, cut once, make sure that we're doing everything we can to control these tests, because ultimately, William and Mary and College of Charleston have taken a huge risk by trusting me, my team, my vision, and we're trying to do everything we can to control sort of the tests we have to get positive, conclusive results that we can then build on. But, Matthew Lambert, Dan Frezza, they are really extraordinary leaders. If you have a chance, you should reach out to them. You should look at their posts. You should talk to them, because not only are they extraordinary fundraisers and extraordinary fundraising leaders, but they are courageous and they are truly the ones that are inventing the future.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've been on the version 2 website, or if you've I know we talked a little bit about this, there is the aspect of where you've now actually been. One of the engagement points is to actually send people things real. So this question has been, how does robotics fit in? And I know that's how you're using it. But talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. No, this is so the thesis of version 2 is that version 1 of version 2, the very first version is right now. This is sort of all text and email. What we've been able to do over the past couple of weeks is we've been able to use robotic handwritten messages to send handwritten stewardship thank you notes. And if you reach out to me or my team, I can send you a video of it. It's wild. So what happens is the donor goes through the journey with the autonomous fundraiser. The autonomous fundraiser sends over a video that says, hey, thank you for your gift of $500. Also, you'll be receiving a note card in the mail from me. Just wanted to let you know that's coming. And so crossing the digital threshold, allowing the donor to interact with the autonomous fundraiser in a way that they never expected. These handwritten machines that take text and they actually handwrite notes and send them, it crosses the digital threshold. And those are the situations that we're looking for. How can we get this out of just digital communication? How can we bring it into the real world? Things like email introductions. So if the autonomous fundraiser doesn't know the answer to a question, and it's specific about a part of the organization, the autonomous fundraiser can make an introduction. We have this really great sort of partnership coming up with a drop shipping company. As a donor makes a gift and the fundraiser stewards that gift and says, thank you for your gift, they can drop ship a thank you gift, a mug, a t-shirt, a blanket to the donor with a note. And so crossing the digital threshold with robotics, that will be sort of part of what we are working on over the next 6 months. But I think that's going to define sort of how, at scale, how this is accepted. Can you get it out of just being email back and forth or text back and forth? Can you bring it into the real world with introductions to people? Can you have them schedule meetings with students? Can you send a handwritten thank you note with robotics? Can you send a gift that's directly related to what happened with the autonomous fundraiser from the autonomous fundraiser? It's wild, and we're just learning about the extent that we can execute.
That's fantastic. Well, I really appreciate you joining. I appreciate everybody being here. I think those of you that sort of follow our group and have been paying attention, like, we've been super excited about what AI can do and where it's going and how it can drive efficiency in our work. But this has just been a huge leap forward, and it'll be exciting to see where it goes. So we had one question: how can I continue to stay up to date? Follow us, follow Givzey. You can find Adam on LinkedIn. Trust me, more to come on this. It's going to continue to be exciting. So appreciate everybody being here. Really appreciate you, Adam. Thanks for always pushing this sector forward, and for being such a great friend to all of us here at Orr Group. And we'll talk soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for joining.